Hello, I'm Brian Galbraith, owner and founder of Galbraith Family Law. We're getting a lot of questions about support during the pandemic. People want to know how you determine it in these circumstances with people losing jobs or being forced to go part-time. And there's lots of changes right now that we're all going through. And so I've brought together three of our lawyers at Galbraith Family Law to have a discussion about child support and spousal support, and hopefully they'll answer many of your questions. So I've brought together James, Shannon, and Brett, and we're just going to have a little conversation about support. So I'd like to start with you, James. What is the law of support during this pandemic? So many things are changing. So how is support determined?
Well, it's important to remember that the law on support has not changed due to the pandemic. The law on child support is still governed by the child support guidelines, which is based on residency of the children and the income of the parents. If it's a primary residency situation, then child support will be based entirely on the payer's income. And if it's a shared parenting situation, it's generally governed by set-off child support, which
So
means both parties' incomes are taken into account.
what do you mean primary residence or shared parenting? What do you mean? How does that
Well,
determine?
the child support guidelines provide a cutoff that is 40%. So if the children reside for at least 40% of the time with each parent, it's considered a shared parenting situation. Anything under 40% is considered a primary residence with the parent who has more than 40%.
So then child support is paid by the person who has less than 40% based on their income alone. Is that right?
That's correct.
How about spousal support?
Spousal support is based on an income differential of the parties. Um, it's governed by the spousal support advisory guidelines generally. Um, and during the pandemic, it's going to require material change in circumstances to change spousal support. It's a little trickier than child support because presumptively spousal support does not change on an annual basis. But if someone were to lose their job due to layoffs because of the pandemic, then that would most certainly be a material change in circumstance.
So then you'd have to adjust the spousal support, and that's kind of a negotiation, isn't it? But child support is a little bit more black and white with the child support guidelines.
Child support is definitely black and white. There's a common misconception that child support is simply based on one party's tax return from the previous year. And while that's generally the case, if there's been a material change in circumstances, child support can be adjusted at the date of the change in circumstance. This is typically when someone changes jobs or has a significant salary increase or decrease. Um,
Or they get laid off because of a pandemic, right?
or they get laid off because of a pandemic.
Right.
So if a party has been laid off, what they can do is they can try to calculate what an approximation of what their annual income would be with what they're receiving from employment insurance, and then refer to the child support guidelines and pay that amount while they're on EI. If they are to return to work at some point, at that point, the child support should then be adjusted back up to based on whatever their current income will be.
Great, thanks, James. Shannon, what about the sharing of extracurricular costs? And a lot of parents share post-secondary education expenses of their children, and all that's shifted. I guess a lot of people's incomes have shifted, and maybe those expenses have shifted. How does that work now?
Yeah, so as James has mentioned, it's important to remember that the laws themselves have not changed. So what we're dealing with is the change in incomes of potentially both parents or one parent, and then the change of the actual expense for the children. So Section 7 expenses or extraordinary expenses are based on what the children are actually doing. For most people, daycare has now been suspended.
Right.
Depending what other activities your children is in, those might have been suspended as well. For university, they may no longer be paying rent where they are. So those things are going to play into it.
Yeah, we
But
were talking about that. That my kids are still in dance, and we're paying for that, but we're doing it by Zoom. But other kids who might be playing lacrosse or soccer, those activities are gone. And and a lot of the kids are home from university. They're still in university, but they have different expenses now, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step is always going to be, what are these expenses, and figuring out what that looks like monthly. So if your child has been able to continue in dance or other activities, then that's still an actual expense that you're incurring. The next step is figuring out, what are your incomes to share those expenses. So as James was saying, a good way to do that, if one or both parents have been laid off, is to look at what your projected income would be on employment insurance. And then when we sort of get back to this normal again, we would readjust and relook at those activities.
Right. And then, of course, there's the added complexity of the self-employed person, who it might not be quite as clear that what their income is. If they're running a restaurant, it's probably clear that they're in a deficit position. But in other businesses, they might have a changed income, and you'd have to figure that out too, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it's going to take some reasonableness from both parents, right? So, like Brian has said, if they're running a restaurant, there's likely no income there, or very little income. Some restaurants are open doing just delivery, or some have even set up drive-throughs, even if they're a sit-down restaurant. So maybe there's a little bit of income coming in there, but far less than what was happening before the pandemic. So there is going to be a little bit of reasonableness that needs to come from both sides, and some honesty as to what your income is, especially if you're self-employed right now, and to be able to have that good dialogue between the parents. Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're in this together. Parents need to find a way to cooperate and come to an agreement. But Brett, the courts are closed. We can't run off to a judge and ask the judge to determine these things. So what are clients going to do in these circumstances with the court being closed?
Well, a large part of our way of helping people, even before this pandemic, has been to help out-of-court negotiations. And that is true for all parts of family law, whether it be support, child support, spousal support, property. Every aspect of family court can be negotiated out of court. And in fact, that is a large part of the way we help people normally. So for us in Galbraith family law, all our lawyers spend a lot of their time helping people with negotiation. The other part you'll hear is a process called mediation that often families use, which we also are involved in helping families with regularly. For many of us, for 20 or more years, have been doing that process. Similarly, you'll hear of another process called collaborative law, which many of the lawyers in our office offer that to families as well, which is helping families to do the negotiations together. And then also there's, arbitration, even if we need to have a private version of the court. All of these processes exist, have always existed, and many judges and lawyers like us encourage people to use those processes regularly. Right. So we will continue to offer those processes to people, and we will give people all the options that are available to them.
Absolutely. And, we've been, I think our reputation of a firm is based on the fact that we always try to negotiate agreements first and foremost, and we've been doing that for many years. And we've been working remotely. Here we are on a Zoom call in 4 different cities, and we've been all able to work remotely. And that, again, is nothing new for Galbraith Family Law. We've been working remotely for many years, so we can continue to do that using Zoom or Skype, phone calls, fax, email. Everybody has complete access to everything remotely, and so we can continue to help clients. So if you have any questions that aren't answered by this video, please give us a call, and we'd be pleased to do a consultation for you and help you look at your options and help resolve any issues that you're facing. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.